Imagine yourself in the middle of Hong Kong. 1 million people per square mile. How do they do that? How do they all get along? How do they interact? Is it this thing called society? Hi, I'm Mark Winfield, and thank you for joining me. Before we start, I think I should tell you that I'm hardwired, and so are you. Let me explain. Margaret Thatcher said, "There is no society." She's wrong. Look around you. Society is a group of like-minded people governed by a common set of norms and values. Norms and values. That's what we're going to talk about and how society works. Norms and values. You won't find a list of these things. They're different everywhere you go. These things are often called the fabric of society, and it's described by a modern philosopher as an energy field that surrounds us and penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. So, who is this great philosopher? Why, it's Yoda, of course, from the Star Wars movies, and he was talking of the Force. The fabric comes from lots of places, including the movies. Let's take a look at the fabric and see if we can understand a bit more about it. We all have a set of sensibilities that are the core of who we are, both as individuals and as a society. There are lots of choices to make in coming up with our own personal okay system. Important choices like truth. To a person of faith, God is the truth. To an atheist, there is no God. Right and wrong. It seems pretty well universal that you shouldn't take what doesn't belong to you. But nowadays, if you can download it, go for it. And morality. There are lots of choices available if it's sex and booze that you're talking about. And freedom. How much freedom are we prepared to give up to make society work? And respect. How do we decide what is respectful? What is okay? There are lots of choices available. And in the end, the mix of all this becomes our personal okay system, our operating system. And somehow, out of these many options, there's enough common ground for society to work. What is this common ground? Is there a constant that allows society to work? One constant might be the notion of doing the right thing. Who or what do we give credit for this getting along, this common ground, this fabric of society? It comes from many places, including Yoda, but mainly 3 places historically: governments and laws, churches and religions, and families. Since the beginning of time, we've had governments who have rule books called laws, and they try to define and sometimes impose what is truth, justice, responsibilities, punishment. We walk through this every day. Churches and religions also have rule books, and they appeal to our need to believe there's something else, something after, and they provide us with a roadmap on how to get there. And families, that's where we first learn much in our lives, where our education occurs, where we first interact with others. Somehow, all of this mixes together, and we come up with our okay system. These institutions have all influenced our choices for our personal okay system. And in the end, they mix together, and somehow, against all odds, society works. But how can that be? How can these things mix together? What is the constant that allows that to happen? Let's look at some of this in action. My friend Pam Peroto is one of the top 50 volunteers in Canada. Let me tell you her story. Pam and her husband Jerry moved to Colombo, Sri Lanka, retiring from a career in the oil industry. There they lived in a beautiful home with a swimming pool and servants, a charmed life. Pam couldn't find a good hairdresser in Sri Lanka, and so every month she traveled to Dubai, a 4-hour plane ride just to get her hair done. They were living the good life, and they loved it. But their life would change. On December 26, 2004, a terrible tsunami hit the Indian Ocean, and in Sri Lanka, 30,000 people died, and 1 million people were displaced. Now, Pam's neighborhood was not touched by this disaster, but somehow she felt something had to be done, and without any prior experience, she organized her neighbors, got trucks, and medicine, and water, and food, and headed into the disaster zone. And in the coming months, the aid organization that she founded, Impact Aid, helped many thousands in need. But why did she do this? Well, why did she feel a need to help? She could have just gone back to the pool and written a check, and everything would have been fine. But there's more to Pam's story. One day, while Pam was working in a refugee camp, the aid workers brought her a young woman named Jawenta. Jawenta had been hoarding drugs to end her life. Jawenta had lost everything. She had lost her husband, her child, her parents, her village. She was completely without hope or a future. That night, while driving home, Pam passed by some bead shops and came upon the idea of hiring Jawenta to make jewelry for her, and from this, the charity Work for Widows was born. Work for Widows now, 10 years later, employs 122 women with 350 children who get to go to school, all because of Pam. Why did she do this? What was the trigger that caused this to happen? What made Pam step forward? I think we can agree that Pam did the right thing. And if I say the right thing, you understand exactly what I mean. How can that be? It's because we're all hardwired. And what is it that we're hardwired with? Jisoo Buyu Wu Shiyu Ren. The Golden Rule. This is what Confucius said 2,500 years ago. Never impose on others what you wouldn't choose for yourself. Do you remember hearing that for the first time? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is the golden rule that's hardwired in all of us. This is the common ground that allows society to work. Faced with disaster, Pam couldn't help herself. The operating system just kicked in, and she had to volunteer. Do we have to have a disaster to trigger the hardwired response to do the right thing? Let me tell you about Helen. I first met Helen when she was 15 during an interview to join our United Way board. Helen had already contributed significantly to our community, and in her 2 years with us, she contributed even more. Following high school, she did as many students do. She went away to another city to university. I contacted our charity in that city and told them that if she came forward, she was worthy of support. Well, Helen did step forward. With their assistance, she organized students at her university and a second university, and as a result of her efforts, many new volunteers learned of the needs of community and took that knowledge with them back to their hometowns. What was it that made Helen step forward? She had lots of other things to do, and unlike Pam, her situation was not extreme. Helen's life was supportive. Her family valued community, and she learned about helping from the United Way. This seems to keep the golden rule close to the surface. The operating system takes care of the rest. What have we learned? Volunteers like Helen and Pam are awesome. The golden rule is part of us. It's hardwired in, part of everybody's okay system. And that's a really good thing. We can see that the golden rule is the key that makes society work. For Helen and Pam, the golden rule was just below the surface, and the situation brought it out. We have also seen that governments and laws, churches and religions, and families are all influences on our okay system. And if you think a little further, you can see the golden rule is present in these three institutions. And that has helped support society in the past. But are these institutions now in decline? People are very cynical about government. Churches are a bad word, and traditional families no longer exist. So how do we continue to support the Golden Rule, to keep society in balance, so that people help each other? Do we leave it to chance? Hope that social media will take care of it? Or do we need to take an active role? I believe the future lies with volunteers like Helen and Pam and the values that they represent. Volunteers are the heroes of our time and should be celebrated. We need to create an institution that is volunteers. And this institution will embody the characteristics that they have. Good things like caring for their fellow man, taking responsibility for it, and respect. If we do this, I think we will be fine. How do we do this? That's another discussion for another day. Thank you for joining me. After we shot the video, I realized that there was another chapter to Pam's story that I think I should tell you. Pam moved to our town and bought a historic inn with her husband Jerry, which they operated, and it became their home. And it's in that inn that we first became exposed to the Work for Widows program, because Pam sold jewelry there. The jewelry was stored there. We received shipments from Sri Lanka there and packed up the jewelry there to ship out to other people who'd sell it. Had our meetings there. And it was also the birthplace of the Impact Aid Society of Canada, which was the organization here in Canada that operated the Work for Widows program. Anyway, one day I was sitting in this chair and the phone rang. And a friend of mine was on the other end, and he said, "Mark," he said, "I think the inn is burning down. I think you should go there." So I got in my car and went to the inn, and sadly it was terribly ablaze. And there was just a huge commotion there with the fire trucks and people. And the inn eventually just burned right to the ground. And Pam and Jerry were there, and as you can imagine, Pam was just in a terrible state, seeing her home and her business just go up in flames. And during the whole time that the fire was going on, Pam was becoming more and more and more upset. And what she was upset about was the women in Sri Lanka, because she became concerned, how are we going to save the program? All of our jewelry, all of our resources are in the inn. What are we going to do? What are we going to do for the women? How are we going to survive? And in the end of the day, eventually got Pam and Jerry away from the fire, away from all of the commotion, and we came back here. And it was late at night, 11:30 or midnight, and got them sat down, trying to calm them down. And Pam remained just terribly beside herself over worry for the women. And anyway, the phone rang. So I picked up the phone, and the person on the other end said, "You have to come and get this stuff now. You can't leave it here." And I said, "Who is this? What stuff?" And it was the police department. And what had happened, unbeknownst to us, is that the firemen, the volunteer firemen, had gone into the inn, gone upstairs to the back of the inn where the jewelry was kept, and saved 100 boxes of jewelry. Well, you can just imagine the relief that Pam felt at that point. And so we went to the police department and got the jewelry and found a place to store it. And in the coming months and weeks, we got the jewelry fixed up and saved the program, because that was all the resources that we had. And the program continues now. And it's interesting to see that just as Juwenta needed a volunteer to save her, the volunteer firemen saved Pam that day.